For we contend not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this present darkness, against the spiritual host of wickedness in the heavenly places. From the American Midwest comes This Present Darkness, where we explore the supernatural aspects of the paranormal from a Catholic perspective and expose the dark forces in our world and beyond, both seen and unseen. Now, here's your host, historian, paranormal investigator, author, and ghost lorist, Ursula Bielski.
Well, hello and welcome to the show. My name's Ursula Bielski. For those of you who don't know me, I am a 35-year veteran paranormal researcher, ghost and hauntings investigator, folklorist, historian, and a lifelong Catholic. And on this show, we look at everything in the world of the supernatural from a Catholic perspective. And tonight, we are delving into the next part of the Devil in Dreamland series here on This Present Darkness, where we're looking at the spiritual aspects of the UFO enigma. Tonight, we're going to be looking at some crazy stuff, including not only the involvement of Aleister Crowley, of all people, and his American followers in the current UFO craze, but also a body of apparently United States government officials who have came, still believe that aliens are demons, and that Aleister Crowley and his followers are the reason that these demonic extraterrestrials have come into our culture with such a vengeance in the last 75 years. So without further ado, let's jump into this crazy, crazy topic. Now, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the name Aleister Crowley, although you probably pronounce it Crowley. Well, there's been a lot of heated debate about this, but I think it's safe to say that Aleister Crowley did pronounce his name Crowley, because he was known to tell people when he met them, "My name is Crowley, rhymes with holy. My enemies call me Crowley, but that's foully." So he himself would tell people that it was Crowley, not Crowley. So I'm probably going to use both, as most people do. And no, it's the same person that I'm talking about. But as you may know, Aleister Crowley was known as the wickedest man in the world when he lived in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And he is, he was a pompous ass, of course. He was a complete pervert, pedophile, and everything else under the sun. And unfortunately, a lot of people idolize him today, and he has really been instrumental. He was instrumental in the birth of the modern satanic movements, the rebirth of the Wiccan religion, witchcraft, paganism of all kinds, ritual activity, etc., etc., etc. So Crowley, even though he's kind of a goofball, dingbat, weirdo, pervert, really was responsible for a lot of the unfortunate practices that we see across our culture today, not only here in the United States, but around the world, with the rebirth of all these satanic, Luciferian, occult religions and practices, such as the Church of Temple, the Church of Satan, the Temple, the Satanic Temple, the Temple of Set, all this goddess nonsense, goddess religions that is a big part of the feminist movement, all this stuff. So Crowley had a lot to do with all of these modern movements. That's to be sure, and I'm not going to question that at all, but we are going to question just how much he had to do with something else tonight. Now, Crowley, he had a long and colorful life, of course, and, was part of the whole early 20th century, fringe lifestyle with artists and doing drugs and drinking and having all sorts of sexual liaisons. The religion that Crowley founded, which he called Lemma, has as its center a practice called sex magic. And Crowley and his followers believe that the sexual act produces energy that can be used to work magical spells. So you'll see these perverts all over the world who follow Crowley engaging in all sorts of sexual perversions. And we're going to get a little more to that in just a few minutes. But Crowley was involved with this stuff from a fairly young age as a young man. He was from a Christian family in England. His father owned a brewery, and Aleister just kind of took off left from all of this at an early age and began his life of his path to being called the wickedest man in the world. And he traveled all over the world. He was a mountain climber, which took him to a lot of different countries. And it was after his marriage, when he went to Egypt, that he claims that he contacted this deity that gave him this message for creating this new religion. Unfortunately for Crowley, a scholar found out later on that the whole thing was copied from an old book. So it's everything basically he said was BS. He was, you know, a charlatan, a snake oil salesman, and would make up anything just to get people to follow him and, you know, kind of worship the ground that he walked on, which a lot of people did and still do for some unknown reason, because he was just a complete goofball slimeball. Anyway, one of the places that Crowley's magical explorations took him to was Loch Ness in Scotland. And I've talked a little bit about this in the past. He bought a house called Beluskin House, and Jimmy Page actually bought this house later. And the house is right on Loch Ness, and it has a long history of, you know, just tragic events happening there, deaths and things like that. But a lot of people connect the things that happened at this house to a series of rituals that Crowley performed there when he first arrived at the house. And he, what he was trying to do was to perform this 6-month-long ritual that would contact not only his, what he called his guardian angel, which in the occult world, that means like your higher self. He also wanted to summon the demons of hell that ruled over him so that he could bind them and keep them from influencing him, which, as you can probably figure, didn't work out so well. So he's very famously, he's in the middle of performing this ritual when the head of the Order of the Golden Dawn, who is, I believe, in Germany or Austria, summons Crowley, not summons magically, like sends him a telegram, to come and meet with him privately about something. So very famously, Crowley stops this magical ritual in the middle of it, and he leaves it undone. So he leaves this portal open, right, that he's opened for all of these demons to gather outside of his house on Loch Ness. And he goes to, you know, England or Austria, whatever, or I'm sorry, Germany or Austria, one of those, to meet with this guy. And so according to the legend, all of these demons that were summoned by Crowley were, you know, loosed kind of upon him. And so that's kind of, oftentimes that's looked at as one of the sources of why he became such a horrible person. But a few people know that Crowley did spend some time here in the United States, specifically in New York City. And one of the things that he did when he was in New York was to conduct a series of rituals called the Amarantha working. And he performed the Amarantha working in some rented rooms on Central Park West in New York City. And during this ritual, he claimed that this being was summoned, that he summoned this being that he called Lam, Lam. And he drew a picture of this being, and the pictures, this portrait that Crowley drew has become very famous in recent years because it bears a very interesting similarity to the so-called gray aliens that so many people have encountered in contactee or abduction experiences during this explosion of those in recent years. This initial contact with this being called Lam that Crowley claimed to have made blossomed, or should I say maybe deteriorated into a whole movement and following of people, a cult of Lam. And you can see there's a whole Reddit thread of people that talk about their attempts to try to contact Lam. Now, again, let me just stop here for a minute, because really, these people that worship and idolize and are fascinated by Aleister Crowley are completely uninformed, insane, ridiculous. And I really think these people just are not aware of just what slimeball this guy was, this guy who had a threesome with his girlfriend and her literally newborn daughter, and wrote poetry about the things that he did to her, this baby girl, so which included cunnilingus. So anybody who has any inkling of like respect or adulation for Aleister Crowley and wants to follow in any way anything that he did, you are part of the problem. That's all I'll say. Anyway, Crowley is also, he used to camp also on Long Island near Montauk Point. And a lot of people think that he was involved in the alleged goings on that were happening there with the government that became known as the conspiracy called the Montauk Project, which had to do with experiments in time travel, contact with aliens, and all kinds of other mind reading and all kinds of stuff like that. So I don't know about any of that. All I know is Crowley's been connected to that as well. But we do know that he did conduct this ritual in New York City, and that supposedly he had contact with this being that looked like a gray alien. Now we come to this part of the story in which we really have to look at this idea that Aleister Crowley was a very powerful occultist, a very powerful magician, magic practitioner with a K, magic with a K, and that he actually had a lot of occult powers. Now, I'm not so sure about that. And there's a lot of people that question just how much power Crowley could have to enact some of the things that he is being credited with today. And that is that he is being credited for no less than the beginning of the modern UFO enigma, the explosion of incidents involving people's contact with aliens, abductions by aliens, seeing flying saucers, and all of this stuff. Because two of his followers in the United States were two very colorful characters in the history of American occultism, American religion, and American science. And those were Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. Jack Parsons was an absolute genius in rocket science. And he actually was one of the founders of the Jet Propulsion Laboratories in Los Angeles. He has been whitewashed out of the history of NASA because of his occult involvement. He was as fringe as Crowley was. He ran a boarding house where you could only live there if you didn't believe in God. There was all kinds of crazy stuff going on in there. And this was a kind of an outpost of Aleister Crowley's religious movement, his religion called Thelema. And there was a temple that was operated out of Parsons' boarding house out in Los Angeles, where all kinds of ritual activities, including, of course, sex magic, which was at the heart of this religion, took place around the clock. L. Ron Hubbard showed up here one day and asked if there was a room available, and he and Parsons became immediate friends. And Hubbard became a follower of Aleister Crowley through Jack Parsons. I should mention that Parsons and Hubbard were so out there and insane with what they were doing that even Crowley kind of called them idiots and said they were kind of embarrassing and they were just totally out there. So you can see the extent to which these guys were practicing fringe occult stuff, if Crowley was even kind of horrified by it. So Jack Parsons gets it into his head that he is going to bring into the world the spirit of the whore of Babylon. And in order to do this, he has to first summon a woman that he will mate with in order to create this love child, this moon child that will come into the world and be Babylon reborn, the whore of Babylon come into the world. So basically he's trying to bring out, the Antichrist, the end times, and the whole bit, right? So he and L. Ron Hubbard go into the Mojave Desert, and some people claim that this is the exact spot where Area 51 is today. So it gets very involved and conspiracy-ish, right? But this stuff is true. The two of them went out into the desert, and literally Jack Parsons masturbated onto some sacred tablets while L. Ron Hubbard communed with spirits on the astral plane. And after a lot of trials, failed trials, and lots of masturbation, apparently, and God knows what else between the two of them out in the desert, Parsons said that they returned home to the boarding house, he and L. Ron Hubbard, and there was this beautiful redheaded woman waiting there for him, and she was looking for a room. And this was Marjorie Cameron, who became a very famous occultist and artist out in California. Well, Parsons was absolutely convinced that this woman was the manifestation of the rituals that they had just done out in the desert. Maybe she was, who knows? I don't know. Anyway, I believe anything at this point after everything that I've learned. But a few years later, Jack Parsons blew himself up in his in-home laboratory, which there's a lot of conspiracy around as well. And the next year was what's considered the first UFO sighting of the modern era. And that was the sighting of Kenneth Arnold, which we'll talk about more down the road on this show. All right, we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we're going to look at a secret alleged government organization that became convinced of the reality and power of what Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard did out in the desert. And we're going to find out all about what that organization is allegedly called and what they decided to do about it. So join me right after the break. Have come to believe that the modern UFO movement and this boon in experiences with the gray aliens, with abduction experiences and contactee experiences, alien implants, flying saucer sightings, that this all began out in the Mojave Desert when Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard opened up this portal. A lot of people say they ripped a hole in the space-time continuum, and all of these extraterrestrial demonic entities came flooding into our world. And Parsons died in the explosion before he could close it up. Now, according to some of the researchers into this subject matter, predominantly Nick Redfern, who wrote a book called Final Events about all of this, interesting book. I don't know how much of it is true because it's all based on sort of secret sources, but it's definitely interesting. Some people believe that that there was this hole in, the veil, I guess, between our world and the supernatural world. And so that is why these demonic extraterrestrials have come into our world and are now wreaking havoc on our civilization because of what Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard did out there in the Mojave Desert, basically under the influence of Aleister Crowley. I just mentioned Nick Redfern's book, and it's definitely an interesting read. It's the source of information about a secret government organization known as the Collins Elite, which was allegedly formed back in the 1940s after the government realized that Parsons and Hubbard had caused this rip in the veil between our world and the spiritual world. And this theory or conspiracy theory about the Collins Elite puts forth that this government agency was a loose association of government workers or officials who came together because they were all fundamentalist Christians, and they were very concerned that the government, after it realized what Parsons and Hubbard had done, was now using magical rituals, ancient rituals, to try and communicate with these demonic entities in order to work with their power and weaponize it for the United States and for military use. I'm not making this up at all, I promise. I'll put all the sources in the description. So according to the Collins Elite, they were so concerned about the government doing more than dabbling in the occult, actually using these ancient rituals to communicate with demons, and have demons cooperate with them, that they felt they had to come up with some way to combat this. And their solution apparently was to try and get the United States to become a theocracy where we would be governed by the law of Moses, of all things. Now, why they would want this to happen, I have no idea. And Nick's book doesn't tell us why this was their solution. But it gets pretty involved and it gets pretty weird. But apparently, the original members of the Collins Elite are mostly dead now. A couple members maybe still alive that are very elderly. Remember, this was started by grown men back in the 1940s after, the first UFO sightings in 1947. So we don't know if today there's still a faction of this going on, kind of as a auxiliary governmental body or not. But we do know that there seems to be a lot of evidence that something like this did exist. And again, the foundation of the Collins Elite was the belief that Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard opened up this portal out in the desert and unleashed all of these demonic entities into the world. And whether you believe that or not, apparently there's a faction of the government that does believe that. And I find it very interesting, we just talked about Dr. Michael Heiser last week, the author of The Unseen Realm, who wrote so much about the supernatural world and the invisible entities that are very much real, but that we can't see, such as, the fallen angels, the good angels, the guardian angels and such. The demons, the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. And he reviewed Nick Redfern's book, Final Events, that talked about the Collins Elite and Parsons and Hubbard. And his feeling was that, like I've already said, Crowley and, Parsons and Hubbard, they were goofballs. They were weirdos. They were, sex addicts. And he felt Heiser before his death, when he reviewed Redfern's book, said, I think people give Crowley and his ilk way too much credit and way too much power. And I tend to agree with that. But also, and he also goes on to say that, demons aren't sitting around waiting for humans to give them power to do things. Well, I, as a Catholic, wouldn't agree with that. Dr. Heiser was an evangelical. I am a Catholic, and Catholics give demons, we feel very strongly that demons are sitting around waiting for us to give them power to do things. But that power comes from God. It doesn't come from us, but we do give our free will to assent to allow demons to be part of our lives. So I wouldn't necessarily agree with Dr. Heiser in that regard, but I also am not sure how much power one person or three people can have, as determined as they can be. I mean, Crowley and Parsons and Hubbard are just regular people like you and I, and there's no reason why any of them should have any more power to unleash good or evil than any of us do. Both on a real basis, but not to the extent where we could create single-handedly the entire UFO movement that affects apparently millions of people through abduction experiences, contactee experience, flying saucer sightings, etc. Now, is it possible that all of the people who have come to follow the ideas of Aleister Crowley and help to bring into existence the New Age that has followed, the New Age movement that's followed since his death and the death of Parsons and Hubbard, could all of these people working together be, kind of the engine that makes all of this go? Well, I've talked about this. I've talked about that there's definitely occult origins and engines of the whole UFO enigma. And so this show, let this have been an introduction to what we're going to talk about in a few more episodes over the spring and summer. And that is those occult origins and engines of the modern UFO movement or enigma or experience. So there's a lot of very distinct personalities. If you're not into ufology, you probably haven't met them yet. But they're very well known to ufologists. So we're going to be talking about people like Albert Bender. We're going to be who used to do rituals in his attic and was apparently the first person to have contact from the Men in Black. We're going to talk about people who used Ouija boards to try and contact extraterrestrials, apparently with success. We're going to be talking about aliens that appeared during the skull experiments in the 1990s in England, and on down the line. So join me in the weeks to come as we revisit this subject of the occult origins and engines of the UFO enigma. And we go on from this point in our discussion about Crowley and Parsons and Hubbard and the Collins elite, and really dive in depth to take a good look at just how occult the trappings are around the modern UFO experience. And I hope you will join me for that. If you're joining me on Buzzsprout, please follow the feed. If you're joining me visually on YouTube, make sure that you like, subscribe, and share this. And make sure you ring the notification bell if you're on YouTube so that you get notified whenever one of our weekly episodes comes up. And I've got a lot of other stuff on the channel, such as book reviews and giveaways, on location stuff, mini documentaries, book readings, and my cooking show, Ghosts in the Kitchen. So I hope you will join me for all of that on YouTube. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Please drop your questions and comments in the description. You can email me at ursulabielski@sbcglobal.net. I'll put that in the description below because nobody's going to be able to spell it. And I hope to see you next time for another episode of This Present Darkness. Until next time, remember to pray for ghosts. I'm Ursula Bielski.
thanks for listening to This Present Darkness. The video version of this podcast is available on Ursula Bielski's World of the Supernatural YouTube channel. Be sure to become a subscriber by signing up with Buzzsprout today. And remember to sign up for the World of the Supernatural mailing list at worldofthesupernatural.com for our monthly newsletter and more. And don't forget to support the podcast through Patreon.